All right, so let's get started. Let me show you my slides here. So this is robustness and chaos. It's the evolution of Drupal's primary menu. My name is Mike Herchel. That's my daughter Millie. That's puppy Dexter. Dexter's actually laying on the floor right over next to me. Dexter is much more bigger and clumsier than he was even as a puppy, which is like pretty hilarious. Um, I work for Lullabot. Lullabot's a design strategy development agency. We also have support and maintenance now. We do a lot of work with large corporations, including a lot of governmental agencies like the state of Georgia and Massachusetts and cool things like that. A bit more about me. I've been working with I've been doing website stuff since like 2001, which is a little bit crazy back when you had to do rounded corners with images and have spacer GIFs and things like that. I started working with Drupal in 2007, version 9.3, and I was hired at Lullabot in 2014, and I started working on this theme that I'm talking about called Olivero in 2019, and I'm gonna kind of tell the story of that. In this presentation, we're gonna learn to evaluate navigation for accessibility. You know, every site has navigation. Let's learn how to look at it from an accessibility point of view. We're going to talk about some common navigation problems and solutions for those. And we're going to talk about recommended navigation problems. And finally, we're going to dispel the myth that websites can't be beautiful as well as highly accessible. So you're probably wondering, well, why do we need a new theme for Drupal? And I can tell you, like, if you're not wondering this, you're probably not too familiar with Drupal. This is what Drupal looks like out of the box right now with some content in it. And this is a theme called Bartik. Bartik's navigation only supports a single level. It looks like it was, it looks like it's like 10 years old or so. It's not ugly or anything like that. But it looks a little dated, and that's because it is. This was developed in 2009 by Jen Simmons, and just to give a little bit of context, Internet Explorer 8 was the dominant browser back then. So you can look at this and it doesn't, to me it doesn't like really convey how amazing Drupal is and the power of Drupal, right? So this is Olivero. This is the theme this is what we're working toward right here. This is a new theme in Drupal core, and it's of course fully responsive, has multi-level submenus as you can see right there, and you can even the navigation, you can even expand, you can even enable that navigation at wider widths through a theme setting, so you can support a really large number of primary navigation items. So when we were developing this navigation system for Olivero, we have a couple different goals right here. We need to make it usable, accessible, and robust. And you're probably thinking to yourself, well, yeah, that's like everybody, but what does that mean? So when we're talking about making it usable, it doesn't necessarily mean make it pretty, but we definitely want it to be pretty. I want it to be like really straightforward. I'm also a fan I'm a fan of the menus opening on hover as opposed to click. You know, I've been to a number of different websites where you have to click the menus in order to see what items are under there. And that to me is like this additional barrier. And maybe because it's like at my core, I might be like a little bit lazy and I don't like to like press my finger down, a half a millimeter, but that's just me in general. So I want it to open on hover, and I also want it also, of course, needs to open on click events and touch events and everything like that, and it needs to work properly. When we're talking about making it accessible, we're talking about things like keyboard and switch navigation. It needs to work with any type of screen reader or any other assistive technology. And it needs to also work well in force color mode, which is a Windows high contrast mode. And when we're talking about making it robust, it needs to be, of course, mobile friendly, and it needs to work with all types of devices, including pointer devices, tap devices, and everything in between. We need to support a large number of navigation items. We also, of course, are multilingual. This being in Drupal core, we need to support like every single language, including right to left languages like Arabic. And we also support non-JavaScript environments. So this needs to be usable if you don't have JavaScript enabled. On top of that, Drupal 9 Core supports Internet Explorer 11. And as we are part of Drupal 9 Core, we have to support Internet Explorer 11, which is kind of a challenge because we do things like with CSS grid and things like that. So I'm going to walk through kind of the starting point of the theme and show some real world bugs that were filed, and then show the final result. So I started the initial proof of concept about 2 years ago. So this was static HTML, no Drupal involved or anything like that. And it looked kind of like this right here. We knew that the submenus needed to be keyboard accessible. And so the way we worked with this is we used focus within, so you can navigate to the submenus. And the way that would work is as you're tabbing through the menu system, if you tab to the button or link that's the parent item, focus within would trigger, and then the submenu would open up. And then when you tab, you would navigate through those submenus. At mobile, we had like a little click to expand button, like you would expect. So a couple of the first issues that we ran into is we didn't have any indicator to let the user know that there's a submenu in there. The only way that they would know is if they move their mouse over or if they start tabbing through. And then there's also a particular issue, like what if there's a whole bunch of submenus and the keyboard user just wants to get to the end? They don't want to have to navigate to the end of the submenus, or like through each and every submenu just to reach, like, say, the contact link at the end. So we took that little disclosure button, that plus minus button that was available at mobile, and we made that available at desktop. So you can kind of see it right there. So the way that it worked is you would start tabbing through the navigation. If you highlight that plus minus button, you hit enter or space, it would trigger, and at that point the submenu would appear, and at that point you could tab down into that. On that button, we have the aria controls and aria expanded attributes. And the aria controls points to the ID of the submenu. Aria expanded is just a true false, and it will indicate to the screen reader if it's open or closed. And then of course we removed all that focus within type stuff, right? Because we're managing everything through JavaScript. So this gets into what's called the link disclosure pattern. And this is kind of straightforward right here. It's basically a hyperlink, which will link to a different page. And then to the right of that, where the chevron is, you actually have a button element. The submenu is hidden both visually and from the accessibility tree, because you should not be able to tab to it if it's not visible. So we have the aria controls and aria expanded attributes on there. And on top of that, we have the escape key. And if you hit the escape key, it will close the submenu. On top of that, we do like a couple extra features, including, as you saw earlier, we have things like the hover, the hover effect and things like that. And if you click outside, it'll also close the submenu. Or if you shift focus from under the submenu, it will remove that. So one of the first things we did is we just swapped out that plus for a chevron. It's a little bit more standard. It looks good. Going with our designers were like, that doesn't quite look too right. So we have a chevron there right now. So something else that we had to implement while we were still in the proof of concept stage is what's called a focus trap. So a focus trap basically makes it impossible for the user to tab outside of the contained area. And this will ensure that all focused elements are always in the viewport. So you can see in the case that on the in the movie on the right hand side, the mobile navigation actually obscures the page. It gets in front of it. If something were to get focus underneath of that, it would be a violation of a WCAG success criterion called focus visible. And so the easiest way to solve this is by using a focus trap. It keeps that focus in there. A lot of times you'll see focus traps used on things like modals, etc. So yeah. About a year ago, actually it's a year ago, I think. No. About a year ago, let me back up a little bit. About a year and a half ago, we actually created the actual theme. So this was at Florida Drupal Camp, which in my opinion is the best Drupal camp, FYI. So at Florida Drupal Camp, we created the Drupal theme. And so this is not yet in core right now. This is just, an extra, like a theme that you had to download, right? So the first things we have to do is we have to support various different Drupal features. So Drupal, in addition to the menu system, in addition to regular hyperlinks, it can support things like what they call no links and buttons. The no link just generates a span a span instead of a hyperlink, and a button generates a button element instead of a hyperlink. So if the route is like set to button, it will actually generate a button and there won't be any type of href attribute or anything like that on there. So you can kind of see what that looks like right here. At the top, we have just like the regular link disclosure pattern. In the middle there, we have the no link, which is just a span with the text, and then we have the button next to that because there's a submenu. And then below that, we just have the regular button element with no link or anything like that because the button element controls the will have the text in there. So the button, this is similar to the link disclosure pattern. It's just the button, so we don't have a hyperlink next to it. And this is a very simple disclosure button. This to me is optimal. I've seen like you can consistently go to different websites and people, the developers will be using hyperlinks to toggle elements. And hyperlinks semantically are meant to navigate you somewhere else, whether that's on the page or to a different page where the actual URL will change. Button elements are meant to show and hide things, etc., like that. So if you can, when you're developing menus, use a button element for things like this. So within the button elements that are next to the hyperlinks or the no links, we right now visually you can only see a chevron, but we need to make them accessible to screen readers. So we have some visually hidden text in there that just says simply toggle sub-navigation. And if you were to look at this, you would see like, hey, this is next to, this submenu and it says toggle sub-navigation. It's pretty straightforward what it does. But screen reader users can't look at things and always get the context. If they are navigating from control to control, they might tab directly to this button that says simply toggle sub navigation. It doesn't say what sub navigation they're opening, and it doesn't give them that additional context. We ended up changing that to whatever the text is of the link and then sub navigation. So in this particular case, you can see that says web form sub navigation or feature sub navigation. And we actually even debated using the word submenu. The thought was that navigation was a little bit more translatable. So we also did some work on initializing the aria attributes and states in JavaScript as opposed to HTML source. So initially we had aria controls and aria expanded being set within our twig templates. And the problem with that is if JavaScript is not enabled, those values cannot be modified. Aria expanded cannot be set to true, etc. So what that means is that aria expanded is kind of like aria expanded indicates that this can expand, and if it can't do that, it's kind of a big fat lie. So in this particular case, we initialize all those attributes in JavaScript because at that point we know that JavaScript is enabled and everything's going to work properly. You can see on the right-hand side here, this is this is the button that's right next to the link disclosure pattern. So in this particular case, it would just control a chevron. So within JavaScript, we want the button to show visually. I'm sorry, when JavaScript is disabled, we want the button to show visually, but we don't want it to be accessible to assistive devices because all it is that visual indicator. It doesn't really do anything. So in this particular case, we end up adding aria hidden true and then a tab index of -1 since that button does nothing. And then we use JavaScript to remove those attributes. We've done a lot of work on success criterion 1.4.10 reflow. And what this means is that you should be able to zoom in many times, like to 400%, and there shouldn't be any type of unnecessary horizontal scrolling. In addition to that, user agent style sheets need to be set to, you can override your browser style sheet, and a lot of people do this where they might increase their font size, they might increase their text spacing and letter spacing and things like that. So we found this little bookmarklet right here. You can see this right here, and it just injects the CSS, and you could inject the CSS directly yourself if you'd like. But basically, what it does is it sets it overrides the line height, letter spacing, and word spacing, and margin bottoms. And so we applied those styles, and at that point, we give ourselves a narrow viewport and zoom in to 400%. And at this point, we're looking for any type of horizontal scrolling, something that does not scale properly. There are certain cases where you could have like a very long word or something like that that doesn't break. That might cause the horizontal scrolling, but at that point, that's just kind of part of it right there. We've done a lot of work to ensure compliance with force color mode. So force color mode is available in Microsoft Windows all the way back. I know it's in Windows XP. It might even been in like Windows 2000. So basically, Windows will override the background colors and your text colors, and you need to make sure that things work properly. The video on the right is kind of a black background, but you can also have white backgrounds with black text, or you can create custom color schemes. And on the right hand side, you can also see them using Microsoft Edge, but it's not just Internet Explorer and Edge. People can use Firefox and Chrome in that too, and force color mode too, and that needs to work properly. Force color mode can be a little tricky because not everything works the same. There's some things that don't work at all, including box shadow and background colors. There's things that work properly in some browsers, but not other browsers like background image and SVG. There's this great resource right here, and I'll throw the link in at the end right here, but it's this Microsoft called styling for Windows High Contrast Mode. Windows High Contrast Mode has a number of keywords that you can use this color, so you can do say color button text or background color button face or something like that, and it will actually use whatever the button face value is or color or button text value as that color, whether that be light, dark, purple, or yellow, or whatever like that. Something else that we do a lot in force color mode is we use transparent borders and outlines. Transparent borders and outlines will show in force color mode. So even if you have, say, outline 2 pixels transparent, that outline will be apparent within force color mode. So you can use that for a lot of different focus states. While we were still a contributed theme, I introduced a security vulnerability. So this isn't accessibility right here. This is security, but I thought it was interesting enough to really include right here. So what we had here is I needed to wrap the text of the hyperlink in a span. And so I did this just by wrapping the span in there. But the problem was that the text of the span, like the HTML, was being output to the user as opposed to actually just being an HTML element. Twig was escaping it. So what I ended up doing is adding this raw filter on there, and that worked great. It would output the span and the title, and everything looked great. But the problem is that if you're a nefarious editor, you can insert JavaScript through that link title field now, and that's dangerous because JavaScript can do a whole bunch of things like modify permissions. Anything that you can do through your browser, your JavaScript can do, and that's totally not a good thing. You can see right here, I'm just kind of outputting an alert. So to fix this is pretty straightforward. We end up just not using the raw filter, so you can see the solution at the bottom. So the point of these slides right here is if you see that raw filter and you're developing menu system, just kind of make sure that you're not doing anything bad with it, like we were at initially. When you do it properly, Drupal will actually output. It will escape that HTML, so you can see in this particular case, that third hyperlink over it says script alert hello, as opposed to just outputting the script. And that's really what we want. A year ago on Saturday, so you can see October 16th, 2020, we actually moved into Drupal Core. So we moved into Drupal Core as experimental, which means that there's still some outstanding bugs, but everything's looking super good, and we're gonna get this in right. So at this point, we start having a lot more eyes on it too. Working in Drupal core is a little bit weirder than working, within your own contributed theme or module. If you have your own contributed theme or module, you can commit directly, and you can commit, you can make changes to your heart's content, and you can make rapid progress. Once you're in Drupal core, things start going a lot slower because you are in Drupal core. There's a lot more eyes on it, and it needs to go through a whole process, and then it needs to be the code actually needs to get committed by, I don't know, one of 10-ish people or so in the world that have the authority to commit to Drupal core. So at this point, we have a lot of eyes on our theme, and we start getting a lot more issues. So one of the first issues that we got right here is we have this mouse out event, where if you move your mouse over away from the submenu, it will close that submenu as you would expect. But the problem is if focus was inside that submenu, at that point, you have a focused element that is not visible to the user, and that's a violation of, once again, 2.4.7 focus visible. You're going to see, like, throughout these slides right here, 2.4.7 focus visible becomes kind of our best friend. We solve a lot of problems for that particular success criterion. So the solution in that is just to add a little check in there. We have that mouse out event right there, and then we say if the focus is inside of that submenu, don't close it, and that works out great. We've done a good amount of work on having the sub navigation close on blur. So you can see, like right here beforehand, it was actually possible, even though it was kind of like a little edge case, but it was possible to have these submenus overlap each other, and they could overlap content. And that content, once again, could have focus. Once again, that's a violation of 2.4.7. And so what we ended up doing is we added a blur event listener. So blur, if you're not familiar, is just almost like the opposite of a focus in. Blur is kind of like focus out, although there is a focus out, but they're slightly different. And excuse me. So we added a blur event listener, and at that point we set a little timeout. And once we reach that timeout, it will close that submenu, and that kind of solves the problem right there. So we ran into this fairly interesting problem right here while testing on real devices right here, right? So the problem is that it would take 2 taps to open up a submenu if you were on a touch device. And so like, what's going on right here? This is a little strange. So we set some breakpoints into JavaScript, and we realized that the first tap, well, you tap it one time, and then there's 2 events that get triggered. The first one is the mouse over event. And the mouse over event basically triggers the toggle submenu function. The toggle submenu opens up the menu. But then immediately the click function triggers too. And the click function also triggers that toggle submenu. So what you have is you have that toggle submenu function being fired twice in rapid succession. And so it basically opens and closes in a split second, and it looks like nothing ever happened. When you tap on that for the second time, the mouse over event never activates a second time, because from the device's thought process, the mouse over event has already been triggered. So at that point, only the click event triggers and the submenu opens. So, all right. So when you have a problem like this, the first thing you do as a developer is you Google it, right? So we Googled it. We found this MDN article that said supporting both touch events and mouse events. And so from our point of view, this is exactly what we want right here. And the code to your right is pretty straightforward. The code says if there's a touch start event, which is basically any type of touch event, don't do anything else, and then toggle the submenu. So that touch start event will prevent the click event and mouse over events from firing, and then it will toggle the submenu. And this works kind of like you would expect to right here, except for the fact that there's a WCAG success criterion called pointer cancellation. And pointer cancellation basically says that you should be able to kind of hold that, your mouse button down. You should be able to click on a button, hold that mouse button down, pull your mouse button somewhere else and then release it. And that enables that button not to be pressed. And so there's similar things on mobile, and this violates them right here. So all right, well, that's not going to work. So our second attempt on this is we say, all right, well, we're going to listen for the touch event, and then if that touch event gets triggered, at that point we know it's a touch event, and we're gonna add a little CSS class, and then we're not going to do anything on the mouse over event, and then the click event will fire as normal. And at that point, that worked great, right? But one of the concerns that we have is that it's not just touch devices and mouse devices that we're supporting here. It's basically any device in the world. You know, this is going to be the new default theme for Drupal core. So we have to worry about things like hover capable styluses. And in this particular case, you can see on the right hand side, this is pointer emulation through the Mac OS point scanning tool. And tools like this enable both hover and click. And there's a potential in here that it will almost reproduce the initial problem by doing the hover and click, even if there's no touch event. And so this is a particular issue right here, right? So in this particular case, what we do is we have, we add in here like a little timeout. So the way that this works is if it's a touch event, we don't do anything on the mouse over event. And at that point, the click event can fire like normal. If it is a mouse over event and not a touch event, we add an is active mouse over event, and then we open up that submenu and we set a timeout for like about a half a second to remove that. And then if it's a click event, it looks for that is active mouse over class. And if it sees that, it won't do anything. Other than that, it'll just toggle as normal. So the net effect of this is that it's impossible to hover and then click and within a half a second and have that submenu open and then close. And from my opinion, this is the correct behavior. And this, we tested this pretty extensively on different assistive technology, and it worked great. We ran into another particular issue right here that to me was kind of interesting. And once I knew about this, it was kind of funny because I would see this on other websites pretty often too. So the problem is that we have that fixed header, which fixes itself to the top of the viewport. And then we have a submenu that's longer than the viewport. And because that is fixed right there, you can't ever get to those bottom submenus right here. So this is a violation of, once again, focus visible. And it's probably a violation of a bunch of different issues, because honestly, you can't even get to those. So this was fixed with some CSS right here, where we have like a calculated value with a header height. And then we use that in viewport units along with overflow auto. And at that point, the submenu will have a horizontal scroll bar only if needed. And if the element is scrollable and you start tabbing down, the browser will automatically bring the focus element into view, which is super helpful. So we had a particular issue right here that has to do with the fact that we really don't like control any content. You know, like when I work on client projects, theming is kind of easy in comparison because we know what we're going to get. We know what type of links are going to be there. You know, a lot of times even the design will have the text of the links and things like that. In this particular theme, we don't know what text is going to go on. So we had a particular issue where a person wanted to insert an anchor link. And so the problem is that if you have that anchor link and you're a mobile, the browser will try to scroll down to that. However, when the mobile menu's open, we actually we do position fix on the body, so it can't scroll. So it just never works. In addition to that, the submenu, or like the navigation, never closes. So even if it did scroll, the navigation would kind of obscure it right here, right? So our issue with that, our solution for this is we have a little click event listener attached to every single hyperlink in there, and we say if it has if the hyperlink starts with like the current path and a hash or just a hash, At that point, what we're going to do is we're going to close that menu. And at that point, that'll release position fix and it works out great. So once again, it's a problem with us just not controlling really any type of content. We had another issue that was identified where, remember going back earlier, I talked a little bit about focus traps, and you should be able to tab through a particular element, and then if you get to the last item in the element, it'll start you back, and that kind of constrains the tabbing, so you can't tab to things that are not visible. On the flip side of that, in addition to tabbing, you should be able to shift tab, and shift tab just goes backwards. We had a particular bug in our software where that allowed the user to escape the focus trap, and it was easy enough to fix. However, like the big item that the big takeaway from this slide is remember to thoroughly test. Put it in front of real users and test things out, and that's how this was identified. And when we're talking about testing, test on real devices, we had a particular issue, and you can kind of see it on this video on the right-hand side, is as the page was reloaded, that mobile menu would appear like in the middle and then slide off for every single page load. And it was just like really janky and really kind of sloppy looking. And this is something that didn't happen on any other browser except for mobile Safari. And if you all are like front-end developers, you're thinking, yeah, that's pretty normal for mobile Safari, right? So it was an easy enough fix. It was a CSS fix, but the biggest deal is just like actually test on real devices and do accessibility testing. We worked with the National Federation of the Blind, and they had this amazing quote that made me super proud. And it says, Aloe Vera was very well done and low vision accessible. I'm not finding any issues with contrast, focus, or scaling, and the forms are very well done, and the content is easy to find and navigate. And as soon as I saw this in the email chain, I was like, wow, we're doing a good job here. I'm super happy with myself right here. You can actually check out this website right now. We have a Tugboat preview. Tugboat, if you don't know, just kind of sets up like previews of your website at a certain point. So we have an always active Tugboat preview at lb.cm/Olivero. You can go to it right now and you can check it out. So what's next? So we're trying to reach stable by 9.3. 9.3 is going to be released in December. We just fixed the last stable blocking issue on Tuesday. There's a couple issues just for browser testing where we need to just kind of go through and do like a default check just to make sure we're not missing anything. But at this point, we're cleared for releasing stable, and so we're working with all the core release managers and things like that to try to get this in. Drupal 10 is going to be out in June, and I know that scares a lot of people, but I'm excited because Drupal 10 will not support Internet Explorer 11, and that means that we can do a lot of really cool things like proper use of CSS grid and finally proper use of CSS variables. And once we can support CSS variables, we have all these plans for doing like color changing, so we can change that blue out for green, out for red, supporting things like dark mode and all types of cool things that we really can do with color changing. So I'm super excited about that. Ta-da, that's me. So yeah, I haven't been monitoring chat or anything like that because my slides are full and full screen. But if you have any questions or something, go ahead and ask in QA or ask in chat. So I'm looking at the QA right now. So everybody start typing in your questions. I see one question in here. So so the question, I'm just reading this for the first time. So when this is in core and we are using US Web Design System, will all these options cascade for us automatically, or will the US Web Design System implementation team need to work on this as well? So the answer to that is, yeah, this is not going to cascade because this is part of a certain theme. And I'm not terribly familiar with the US Web Design System theme, but I'm guessing that they're not extending any type of template that we're using. So they would need to implement this themselves. I have in the back of my head like an idea to abstract out the navigation to an extra, like a contributed module where it will just provide like basic styling and some twig templates and things like, and the JavaScript and things like that. I think that would be super super helpful. However, at this point, I'm just busy, between this and some other things. It's taken a good amount of time. So but hopefully that'll come pretty shortly. All right, so the next one, will the navigation be available as a standalone module with CLO? I just answered that for you. So the answer to that is a big maybe. It comes to me getting around to it. If someone wants to do this and I can help them out, like if anyone listening to this wants to work on this and, just start copying the templates and copying the JavaScript and working on this, I am more than happy to help out with this too. So Martin asks, are there any plans to make it easier to subtheme Olivero? So I'm gonna bring down my browser tab right here. And so I have a GitHub repo that shows, instructions on how to subtheme Olivero. Olivero does not support subthemes right now, because if we were to support subtheme, that means we couldn't be changing our DOM structure or anything like that, because at that point it might break people's CSS. So we have the script that enables you to basically copy it instead of subtheme it. Into the future, there's a script that's included in Core that it's basically a script that will copy a theme. Right now, I believe it only works with Stark, and it's like a theme generator. So in the future, you'll be able to say, I want to copy a theme, and I want to copy the Olivero theme, and it will make you a copy of the Olivero theme similar to that GitHub repo. And at that point, you'll be able to modify that to your heart's content without worrying about us breaking things down the line. Let me get back to the Q&A. How easy is it to convert US web design system into Drupal sites? That's a really good question. To tell you the truth, I'm not terribly familiar with about the US web design system. I know that there's been a number of people working on it in the Drupal world. And I think there's a Drupal subtheme on that, but I'm not terribly familiar with the US web design system. Like, obviously, we're not using it on the Olivero theme here. So another question right here. Hold on. Am I looking at the right things? I'm not quite sure. It says Q&A. I think I'm having questions from like the wrong session right here. Just questions like things like job listings and stuff. So yeah. Yeah, so that's it. Hopefully, if anyone has any questions or anything else, you can let me know. But outside of that, I think we're good to go. Thanks, everybody.